Welcome, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast, coming to you from the Podvlog studio in St. George, Utah, and produced by Markel Consulting, LLC. I'm your host, Dave Markel. Welcome back, everyone. This is episode 17 of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. And I'm happy that you're back for part 2 of my interview of Arci Grey. In this episode, I pick up where we left off last week with me relating to Arci my thoughts on her survival and how much I truly believe that she survived her kidnapping, torture, rape, and near-murder experience because of her deep-seated mindset to do just that, survive. And I asked her to share with me her thoughts now to the Arci then that was about to die. I'm excited to bring you this episode because it puts a much-needed perspective on the survival aspect of all Arci went through, and she gives us her unique insights into how she figured out what survival meant for her, and how she wants to share that view with others who are ready to move past victimhood and into surviving and thriving. Thanks again for joining us. Here's part 2 of Arci's story. Part of my goal in all of this is to bring an aspect of being trauma-informed to everyone that I possibly can reach. And obviously you're trauma-informed at this point. You went through some of the worst trauma that a human can endure when we're talking about torture and near death. And actually, there's not a whole lot of reasons why you should be alive.
Yeah.
I think a huge part of that is your mindset and even those survival instincts that your brain did, like that voice saying now. And then in retrospect, you looked at that and went, that is the worst thing I could have done. Why in the heck? But in fact, it was the best thing you could have done because you're sitting here with me. Right. So those dichotomies and contradictory kind of realizations through all of trauma and post-trauma thoughts and regaining cognitive, rational thought instead of how am I going to survive this, that I think are so intriguing and necessary for the audience to hear. And again, I just want to thank you for being here and being able to do this. But at the same time, I'm thinking, man, we could easily go down about 200 rabbit holes through all this story and explore for hours the experience that you went through. I want to know, and I think the audience would really gain from this, what are your thoughts in retrospect to your thoughts? Help me understand what you think of Arci in those moments.
Like I had said, for probably maybe a few years, there was some internal shame. There was an internal dialogue of like, oh my God, how did you walk right into that? How did you let that happen? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? Why didn't you do this? And now in retrospect, when I think about it, I'm like, damn, I'm pretty proud of that girl. There were times when he would say things to me, again, anything he could pick at to try and make me feel anything. He just wanted me to be miserable, and he was torturing me, and he would degrade my personality or degrade my accomplishments or just anything he was trying to do to break me down. And he would say, oh yeah, when we dated, I took you to places that you wouldn't ever get in if it weren't for me. You wouldn't know these people if it weren't for me. You wouldn't have this success if it weren't for me. You couldn't afford this restaurant if it weren't for me. And he said, like, I fed you well and I took you to places, and all these things. I fed you, I brought you to the nicest restaurants, the meals I gave you and the hotels we stayed in and blah blah blah. And it was his dad's money he was using when we dated. But he, he's trying to make it seem like I'm, some piece of crap and he's this, amazing person or whatever. When he was saying those things, trying to make me feel like this tiny piece of crap, I would mumble like under my breath, but I'm like, there were times where I'm like, oh, did he hear that? And I'm like, oh, don't worry, buddy. Where you're going to get 3 meals. Don't worry. You're going to get free places to stay. Like in my mind, I was thinking like, oh, you're going to jail. And don't worry. You want to talk about free meals and free places to stay? Well, you got one lined up for you. Like there was this very snarky attitude in my mind. And there were times where I mumbled those things and he was like, what was that? And I had to very quickly like backpedal and try and say something, you know what I mean? Like, wait a minute. Like, so being snarky and having this personality, a little bit of a smart ass personality going into it, it helped me in a lot of ways. In that it helped me keep my mind on straight going, like, I'm not this piece of crap. I'm not a victim. I'm not helpless. I'm not worthless. So being a bit of a smart ass. My dad did say someday it was gonna catch up with me, but I think it actually it helped me maintain that mindset of like knowing that this was him doing something to me. This was not me. This was not my fault. There was nothing I did that deserved this. That was, I was worth way more than this. And that it was a matter of circumstance. And did I make a bad choice in going over there that night? Absolutely. In any other circumstance, in any other professional relationship or anything like that, I probably would have said, okay, well, we can just wait till tomorrow. I think that was the choice that I made, that in hindsight, I look back and I'm like, you've had good boundaries with this person. Why did you alter that? Why did you change that? And I believe now when I think about it, it was because of the relationship I had with his dad. And I think that probably was, I felt like I was doing a service to his dad, but not to him. And
Right.
All hindsight, none of that
Yeah.
happens in real time.
Exactly. And I'm sitting here thinking and hearing this, and I'm thinking, Arci, don't beat yourself up about that decision. I mean, that was part of his manipulative tactic, all part of the grooming aspect too, of
Yes.
things that were going on long before that.
Right.
But
it's true.
I don't know that I would call that a bad decision in hindsight. I would just call it a decision. It was a pure decision of, that relationship that you had with his father and the business that you had done. And you thought you were going to have a conversation with his dad that was going to be helpful for him. And you're a helpful person and you're a business person. It was business related. And I don't know that I would actually look at that and say that's a bad decision. I'm also thinking there's so many thoughts going through my mind, both from a law enforcement perspective, a humanistic perspective, an empathic perspective. But what comes into my mind as I hear this story is that there are people hearing this thinking, oh my gosh, how could anybody endure that? And I didn't even know that kind of thing happened. And then there are other people listening going, yep, that happened to me. And if it didn't happen that severely, enough of what happened is resonating and touching a lot of survivors' mindsets, saying in their thoughts, thank you, Arci, for telling this story and making it real for everyone, because everybody needs to know this. We all need to do our part to help bring justice to victims and survivors. And I say victims because there are listeners that are still enduring the abuse, and they're survivors in the sense that they aren't
in
dead.
their heart, they're survivors, but they haven't been able to reach that destination yet.
Exactly.
And I understand that.
I think that it's an aspect of this that I want to kind of take you to in communicating with those who are still going through this and who have a very similar story. Because I know we're going to go into a lot of the neuroscience and everything else. And it's just that I think there's a breather that we need to take in terms of what the audience is going through, both from the perspective of those who've never experienced anything like this and those who have. What's your message to both of those groups of people?
Ooh. This is a really great question, because a lot of the clients that I work with now, they're survivors. They're out of the fire, but they're trying to put their lives back together. To the people who may still be stuck in it, I'm going to say two things. The first one is a preface. I love tough love. And the reason is because tough love sounds harsh, but it's the truth. And the faster you get to the truth, the faster you can get out of danger and you can start healing. Absolutely. Hands down, you need the truth. You mentioned before that, and I've done a whole episode on this, on stop telling victims or survivors you're sorry. And the reason for it, and there are, yes, like you want to empathize with them and you want to show them that you care. But oftentimes what happens is when people come up to me and they're like, oh my God, I'm so sorry that happened to you. My response is, I'm not, because it has absolutely allowed me and given me the opportunity to be who I am today. And I'm really effing proud of that person. I don't wish what I experienced on anyone. And my heart goes out to all of the other victims and survivors who have experienced even a fraction of my 4 days, even anything even remotely close to it, because it is absolutely the worst experience, the worst thing anyone can experience. Like, I do empathize and know that what you're going through is painful and it's hard, but you can't unlive it. You can't go back and change. You can't unlive it, but you also don't have to keep reliving it. The next part of this is a little bit of tough love, and I don't say this to hurt anyone's feelings, but I do say it as a way for them to understand the difference. And I think survivors will have a better understanding of this, and I think as soon as victims, people who have that victim, are in that victim state, can wrap their brain around this, I think there will be a shift for them. So I apologize if this sounds harsh, and I apologize for the tough love. But one thing that I learned was there's a clear distinction between victims and survivors. Victims get attention and survivors get results. And what I mean by that is when we are stuck in a state of victimhood, both mentally and in our circumstances, we are feeling all of it. We need attention. We feel helpless. We feel like we need help. So we feel like we need attention. So we scream louder. We tell our story more. These stories are crazy dramatic. I remember telling my story so many times and looking at the faces of people going, they don't believe me. They literally do not believe this happened to me, which makes me want to scream it louder and stomp it up and down and say it louder and louder and louder and louder, and thinking that someone will hear it. Well, guess what? Everyone heard it. No one believed it because they couldn't believe it would happen to them. In telling our story, I told friends and family, and I told my story in a job interview, and I told my Uber driver and bartenders and even on a first date. And I realized that I was stuck in victim mode because I was so desperate for someone to believe this happened to me. And it's like, it's not that they didn't believe it happened to me. It's that it was scary to them because it was the first time they heard the story. And it was scary to them going, wow, I can't believe that this could happen. So that's a distinction that victims need to realize, is that when we're in a state of desperation and we need help, we go and tell our story. Unless you do it in the right way and to the right people and for the right reasons, you're really just chasing the attention. You're not actually doing it for the results. And there's a lot, that could get unpacked we could probably do an entire episode on unpacking that.
Let's plan on it.
Yes, because like I said, it comes across as tough love and it's harsh. And then once you are able to switch into a survivor mindset, all of that makes sense. And it makes sense in that you'll know when and how to tell your story to make a difference, to get a result that you need, not just the attention that you want. Because when we're victims, we need to be believed, right? We need to be believed. We need people to hear us, see us, believe us. But if we don't do it right, we're actually perpetuating the problem and creating more space between us and the others around us. So the other thing I want to say to victims, and I hope that this inspires you to see things differently and realize that even though it feels like you don't have control, you have a lot more control than you think you do. Abuse is just the illusion of control. And abusers are so desperate to be in control, they will do anything for you to give up your sense of agency, your sense of autonomy, and your sense of control. And they will keep going until they do. If you never do, if you don't give up that control, they can't abuse you. They can't. If they are abusing you, it's because you've already given that up. They've already gained access to you emotionally, physically, financially, psychologically. So that damage is done, right? That has happened. You can't unlive that. We can't go back and take those experiences away, but you don't have to keep reliving that. And you can stop it. There's different ways, different scenarios, and different circumstances. Like I said, I dated this narcissist for about 1.5 years, and I cultivated good boundaries with him. And he found my one weakness. He found my weakness. It took him 2 years to find that weakness. And he knew that it was business. I'm very entrepreneurial. I always have been. I've run several businesses in my life. That may even be one of the things that helped me heal as much as it did, because I, again, started another business that was about my purpose and all of that. But that illusion of control is, you have autonomy, you have control, you have a voice, you are strong. Abuse is the illusion of control. It's the illusion that they have control. That's what I have to say to victims and survivors. Hopefully that struck the right chord with people. I know that can come across as tough love. I am not here to shame anyone or belittle anyone or tell anyone that they're doing it wrong, because whatever you're doing to survive, you're doing it right. But if you want a different result, there is a mindset shift that has to come with it.
I know you know this, and I know there are listeners who know this, I think we should talk about, and that is the aspect of making the abuse stop. Getting out of that situation is an extremely dangerous time. The chances for serious bodily injury or death are increased 75-fold when somebody leaves a relationship or gives the sense to their abuser that they're about to. And I know that what you're saying is absolutely true, but I think that message needs to be given too, that when that mindset shift happens that you just talked about, there needs to be a plan. There needs to be something in place that helps that person to get to where you are. You, of all people, know exactly where that is when you've got a knife to your throat that's cut into you and threatened your life. Talk about that planning. Talk about how you get that mind shift change, but also in as safe a way as possible.
Yes. This is probably one of the most difficult things, I think, when you're a victim and you're just surviving, because we don't have the rational cognitive abilities all the time. We're not making decisions that make sense. We're not making decisions that feel good. We're making decisions going, why the hell did I say that? Like, our brains take over our mouths. Our brains take over our bodies. It's this other being that lives literally in the back of your head, in the amygdala, and it takes over for you. So when we look in hindsight, like, why did we say that? Why did we do that? Well, you did it to survive, because the brain, there's 3 rules your brain follows. This is the thing that I've been putting up on social media now, and I'm harping on. I'm actually going to be writing a book on it. I have a program I've created on this whole concept, and it breaks down into 3 very simple things. Rule number 1, no dying. Your brain's first priority is to keep you alive. Every decision you make, every word that comes out of your mouth, every movement you make, every single thing that is happening that feels like it's outside of your control is your survival brain doing it for you. You have to feel safe. Your brain has to keep you alive, and it's going to do all the things that you think are crazy and stupid to keep you alive. Rule number 2 is no crying. That's just an easy way to remember. After your brain feels safe and secure and you have the resources you need, at that point, it will work on making you feel better. And then rule number 3 is no dying again, because it means if you're not growing, you're dying. And so only after you feel safe and only after you have found equilibrium, emotional regulation, it doesn't mean you're going to be happy all the time, then you can work on growth. So that's the healing process, right? And how that translates to exiting a bad situation is, remember, first and foremost, all of the decisions, all the things you're doing, don't try and shame them. Don't try and overthink them. Your brain knows the right things to do. Also, seek help. Seek help of someone who can do the rational thinking for you, who can help you execute those plans. You need the assistance of someone else. It's difficult to get on the internet, to get on, even your phone and plan where you're going to go and what you're going to do, because a lot of times those people are looking over our shoulders. They're checking up on us. I've seen instances where people have called to order a pizza, but really they called 911. Yeah, trust your instinct. You need a friend. You need someone, anyone. There's a whole nother component to this too, which again, probably a whole nother episode. The other component is, once you do have an out, you have to stick to that. You have to stick to that decision. You cannot go back. And I know that sounds oppositional, and people are like, yeah, but they're my financial security. Yeah, but we have kids together, whatever reason, the yeah, buts in your head. No, that is your emotions talking. That's you feeling scared of something new and scared of something different. There's something called neophobia. And it's one of the main causes of re-victimization. And it's that we're afraid of something new. Your brain, your subconscious mind, and your survival brain, as counterintuitive as this is, will choose pain that you've already experienced over a new experience that doesn't, they don't know if it's, your brain doesn't know if it's going to be painful or not.
In the neuroscience of how the brain works in trauma and in dangerous situations, absolutely, it's going to tell you to keep doing what you've been doing because you're still alive. And that aspect of your brain having the purpose of keeping you alive, it's telling you it's working. Don't change this. We don't know what the future holds if you try that new thing, whether or not you'll survive it. So let's just stay where we are. And that's the aspect I think that you're addressing and talking to, is having that plan, having some people in place, some sort of resources that are going to help you survive when you do make that change.
Yeah. Rely on your friends. Trust the people that don't hurt you, not the ones that do. It's just a reminder. It seems obvious, but when we're kind of veiled by control, we don't make good decisions for ourselves.
It's so true. Let's talk a little bit, first of all, about how you came to the conclusion that your life needed to change. You made a huge career change, not just a lifestyle change, but a career
Yeah,
change, and everything in your life changed.
it did.
How-
Everything. My story didn't begin at 2 days before my 37th birthday. My story of trauma started when I was 4 years old. I was sexually abused by two different people from the age of 4 till about 13. When someone had discovered it was happening when I was about 4 years old, they pulled me aside and told me that what I did was wrong. They shamed me for it. And then the abusers played into that. They knew it, and they felt protected, and they continued, one teaching the other, and so on. And it only stopped because the abusers no longer had access to me. I never was offered any therapy, any support, nothing. Just, hey, shit happens, kid.
Wow.
And I struggled. By the time I got into high school, there was some question of whether I had ADHD or ADD, or like I was dyslexic, and it went undiagnosed until I almost graduated high school, because everybody thought that I just couldn't focus. And I wasn't a bad kid. I was a little bit rebellious and like looking for boundaries, but of all of my brothers and sisters, I'm the only one that's never come home in a police car. So there's something about that. But I had blue hair in high school. I was in a punk band. I was, looking for my own myself. I did very much as a child, and even, as a young adult, I didn't feel like I had a lot of support. I didn't feel like people believed me. And I really had a hard time getting my shit together. I struggled in high school to graduate. I ended up taking classes at a community college in order to get into college. And then I did excellent in college. I excelled until, in architecture school, it's a 5-year program. And until my 4th year, it was at that moment that I sort of reached this threshold of my abilities. Like, I became very dysregulated. I was living one crisis to the next, right? Like, couldn't hold a job, couldn't figure out how to like get my stuff together, couldn't get my homework done, couldn't focus. I was a ping pong ball. I was an emotional roller coaster. I lost a bunch of weight. I was down to, I'm about 5'9" and I weighed 117 pounds. I was a twig. And it's not that I wasn't eating, it was the stress and the inability to manage things. So I had lived like this, just all these crises, and I was just labeled like the flake. Literally my nickname was Snowflake. That's what my parents called me. That I was just flaky, and that's just who I was. And my mom used to say, like, well, I hope you marry somebody rich because you aren't ever going to make anything of yourself. Like, there was a lot of that. And there was a massive lack of trauma informed care. That was in the 80s and the 90s. My doctors, none of them put any of the signs and symptoms together. School counselors, when they thought that I had a learning disorder and they wanted to pull me out of the classroom in high school and put me into what was then called special ed. I had an English teacher actually who was advocating for me, saying she doesn't have a learning disorder. There's something else going on. And they gave me an IQ test and all this stuff. And they're like, yeah, she doesn't qualify for special ed, but we need to figure something out. So my last 2 years of high school, I took a few classes in school and the rest was homeschooled. I got my entire senior year done in 3 weeks, all of the workload that was required in my senior year. So it clearly wasn't a lack of ability. It was a lack of a supportive environment.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So, and I didn't know this. So it wasn't until I was in therapy in my mid 20s. I was in architecture school. This was in San Diego. So it was in actually my 5th year. So I was writing a thesis. I was stressed out. My relationship was on the rocks, and the wildfires had come through, and we had to evacuate. We almost lost our house, and it was just one stress on top of another, on top of another, on top of another. And like, it was done. My whole life imploded. I lost my job. I had a thesis presentation. So I was like stretched thin. My life was upside down.
Yeah.
And I was at the absolute capacity to handle any more stress. And the boyfriend calls me that day and says, hey, what time are you coming home? And I was like, I don't know. I have this presentation on Monday. I'll be home as soon as I can. I got home at 8 o'clock at night, and he had cleared the place out. Like, I thought we got robbed. Took his stuff and left on me. Then Monday morning rolls around, and I'm on my way to work, and my boss calls and says, hey, you know that big project we were working on? Well, guess what? It burned down in the fire, so they don't need us anymore, and I'm retiring. So you don't have a job. Okay, bye. Cool. So then I have to go to school and present my thesis, a portion of my thesis. And it didn't go well.
Yeah.
Let's just say the least, it didn't go well.
Wonder why.
Yeah, I can't figure out why. So my life was an absolute mess. And I called our therapist, our couples therapist, and I was, calling her, sobbing to her. This is that victim mode, right? Like sobbing and being, oh, my life, my life, my life. And I went in there and she's like, come on in. And we talked. And all of a sudden, it all bubbled to the surface. And every memory of everything from when I was 4 till 13 came rushing in. I relived it all over again. For the next probably 10 years, I was recycling the same bad relationships over and over. It was the same guy, different face, same guy, different face. Very unhealthy things. I couldn't hold a job. I started businesses and then I ran them into the ground. I was self-sabotaging everything I was doing. It took me years, and I'm talking like a decade. That went on for a decade. I finally started to have that mentality shift, that victim to survivor mentality shift of like, no, I want something different for my life. And so I doubled back down in architecture, and I got my master's in construction management, and I got my real estate license, and I got a vision for my future. I finally knew where I was going. Instead of trying to dig myself out of my past, I finally had, this is where I'm going. I busted my ass. I built a business I was proud of. I built something I was like, yeah, I built that. And I had a great business partner, and we just started this new business venture, and I had 3 or 4 things going on. I was managing about $30 million in real estate development for an investor and doing all these things. And I was like, yeah, I made it. And then that's when this other guy had come into my life. He slowly picked away at those accomplishments and slowly, one at a time, would ruin something. I would have a meeting with an investor and he'd want to come along because he was jealous and I didn't realize at the time. And then, I'd say, no, you can't. And then he would delay and hold me up and I'd end up being late and I'd lose that business. It's those little things. All that work I'd done for myself, I fell all the way back down again. And then I walked right into this, 4 days of hell, as I call it. So yeah, the idea of what trauma does to us. Actually, I'll tell you the story. When I was in the hospital, a couple of my friends came to visit and they were standing outside the door. And one of my friends was telling the other one, she hadn't seen me yet. My friend Tom was telling this other friend, don't be shocked. She doesn't look like herself, but she's in there. Like he's, trying to warn her what she's about to walk in on. And she's like, well, what happened? And he briefly told her, and the words out of her mouth were, this is going to ruin her whole life. And my friend Tom was like, no, it won't. She's strong. Like it won't. And I think he was trying to like erase that mentality from her, her tone of voice so that she didn't walk in with that attitude toward me. Yeah. I think he was trying to protect me from it, but I heard both sides of that and I didn't know who to believe. Right. That was a huge moment for me. I thought that I was hiding my flibberty gibbetness. I thought it was a big secret, but I thought I was showing up to the world and that, everything was great. I thought that I was hiding it from everyone. And in that moment, I was like, oh my God, like this trauma has been ruining my whole life. Trauma has absolutely, and you have the term for it. And I didn't know this term before. And you told me, I think it was, psycho something evidence. What was it?
Psychophysiological.
Yes. And I didn't know that. And, me trying to explain to people like, no, you don't get it. Like something's not right. I didn't have the words for it, but it was showing up in my life. It was showing up in my, my inability to focus. It was showing up in these hyper vigilant moments. It was showing up in these manic to depressive, all these ways. People wrote me off. They didn't take me seriously. And I had to work twice as hard as everyone else just to barely get by. I mean, I was literally working twice as hard as my peers and I was getting half as far. I was watching people accelerate their career after graduation. And I'm like, what is wrong with me? I literally felt like I was absent the day they handed out the secret handbook to happiness. Like, what is wrong with me? And it wasn't until laying in the hospital bed, hearing my friend who meant well, right? Like she wanted the best for me, but she's like, this is going to ruin her whole life. She recognized that something like this can absolutely interrupt your whole life. And that was a light bulb moment for me to go, wait a minute, holy crap, trauma has been ruining my whole life. And so I realized I had this massive sense of empowerment. Like, okay, I need to get my shit back together. Like, I need to get my shit together. I need to put my life back together. And I was like, wait, I don't want that life. I want a new life. I want a new one. So that's what actually inspired me to dive in and not just say like, okay, I need to go to therapy and I need to feel better about this situation. No, I need to change what's happening. That's how I discovered what's going on in the brain and that trauma is neurological. It's based in the body and the brain. It's not in the mind. We experience it through the mind, right? We experience it through frustration and sadness and fear and shame and all of the and anxiety and all these things. That's how we experience it, but that's not the root. That's not really what's going on. And that is what shifted everything. That is what made me realize that, yeah, I was good at architecture and I was good at sales and I was good at real estate and I was pretty good at construction management. And I had built a business because I loved business, but that isn't what I wanted to do. I wasn't making an impact in the world. I wasn't doing something meaningful and valuable with that. And that was the shift. I knew I needed to heal. I knew I needed to become someone different. The only way to do that was to know where I was going, was to have a future plan and have a purpose. That's what shifted what I do now. And what I do now is actually help women overcome trauma and build a business.
I love that. It is so powerful. Tell us that path.
I don't know where to start. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned, and I don't mean to interrupt, but you said while you were laying there in that hospital bed, this realization light bulb moment, I'm going to change.
Yeah.
And you developed this plan, you said. Where did that plan take root? How did that grow?
Building this new path for myself has been a fundamental part of my healing process. But I do remember after hearing that, I had another friend come visit me in the hospital, and I was like, something good has to come from this. I remember saying that, the hardest part, 4 days of torture was really hard. The hardest part was the sleepless nights and the fear and the anxiety and the shame and I couldn't go to the bathroom by myself and I couldn't take a shower by myself. Those were the moments where I was like, okay, this has to help someone.
But Arci, that is so important that you even just said that, because there are people listening to this who are in that boat, who can't take a shower alone, who can't go into the bathroom alone, who can't even walk out of their house because of the trauma and the fear and the absolute devastation that has occurred in their life through their traumas, their assaults. And you're speaking to them. I know it's touching you. I see it. I hear it. I have to keep encouraging you. Don't stop, because people need to hear this. And I want you to know that you are empowering others.
Thank you. The recovery part of it can feel equally as helpless as being stuck in it, but knowing that those people are there to help you and they're not shaming you and they're not judging you. I'm trying to think who wrote about this, but he basically says you are the equivalent of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Whoever you surround yourself with, you will become them. I think I had just read a book that had talked about it, and it was so present in my mind. I had come to that point where, like I said, I knew I wouldn't survive a next time, so I had to be someone different. I had cut ties with that old me, and I don't think I knew who I was supposed to be yet. And I think that's where that journey started. I started to look for those people who were doing the things I wanted to do. And I said, you know what? I'm going to do that. I'm going to go be with them. I'm going to go hang out with them. 10 months later, I was standing on a stage at a conference called Habitude Warrior. It was a personal development conference. A friend of mine had gifted me the ticket. Someone gave them to her as a gift and she couldn't attend. And she said, hey, why don't you go? And at this point, I was still on crutches and I was hobbling around, and I spent a year in physical therapy. And I went there and I met great people doing really great things. And I'm so glad that I did. I met a very successful CEO of a company here in Boston, and he kind of took me under his wing. He said, I'm running this little workshop for anybody who wants to be a speaker. Anybody who wants to be a motivational speaker can come to this. And he's like, you're engaged. No one knew my story at this point. No one knew it happened, but I was just engaged and I was lit up by what I was seeing, what I was experiencing, and this energy and this, I was surrounded by entrepreneurship and these people that just had big goals and were doing big things. They're just doing it. They weren't thinking about it and they weren't dreaming about it. They were just doing it. So he invited me into this little workshop, and it was on a Saturday morning. And, we sat around in this little powwow, and he's like, why don't you get up on stage and tell this story that you've just told to this group of 10 people? And I did. And it was really good. It was like, wait a minute. And I'm watching people's reactions. I'm watching people react to this story. Some of them are just glazed over, like just so engulfed in this thing, and people just came up to me afterwards, like asking me all of these questions about things that I thought were totally unrelated, but that they found value in. And that was what was empowering. And I was like, this is what I'm supposed to do. At that point in time, I was still trying to build my architecture business back up. I lost clients. My business partner and he couldn't run the whole business by himself while I was in the hospital and recovering. So we dissolved that business. I had lost clients during those 4 days. The perpetrator had my phone. He was calling clients and texting people and things, and he burned bridges and ruined relationships. And So there was a big hill to climb to try and build that back up. And I was trying to do that until this day. And I was like, nah, I didn't want my business back as much as I wanted this new thing, because I realized that I could do something bigger and better with my life, and I could help people. And that is probably one of the most healing things you can do, is help others.
I totally agree with that. Absolutely agree with that. It's an admiration that I have for you when I say this. What comes through strongest with you is that it's all about other people who are still victims and need to hear that tough love story, and the survivors who are saying, I want to succeed and get past this and use this. And you're taking that and applying it. I think that's what I want to emphasize in moving forward with you, is that whole concept of how you came to the conclusion in your own mind that this isn't about you anymore. It's about helping others.
Yeah. So I have something I work with when I work with my clients, and this is 4 years in the making. I'm actually coming up on this May will be the 5th anniversary of the incident. It's taken time to build this up and to turn this into something that is, like you said, it helps others and it serves others in a certain way. And it's also been part of my healing journey. I want to touch on something that you said about how you hear a lot of people talk about their story and it's about them. And the difference when you talk to me is that it is about serving others. And it absolutely is. And that is one of the shifts that happens from victim to survivor. When you're very, very close, to that shift is when you tell your story, not for yourself, but for someone else to hear. When you use it as an example of inspiration for someone else. For those people, we need to be our own hero. We need to be the hero in our own journey. We have to be. That's how you heal. You have to be your own hero and know that you can do it. So there's something that when I work with my clients, I call it go give it. And this works for everything, for the little stuff and the big stuff. If your needs are not being met, and I don't care what that need is, I don't care if it's a need for love and affection, or you need quality time, or you need money. Funny little story, it works with money too. Whatever you need, if you need healing, if you need a hug, if you need a little bit of truth, whatever it is you need, it's your job to identify that need in yourself and then turn around and go give that to someone else. Stop asking others to give it to you. Go give that. Go give it. And something crazy happens. It comes back to you. And this is like, sounds all woo-woo and the universe and manifesting, but like, if you want to talk about law of attraction, which I know a lot of people are into, for me, it's all neuroscience. I can prove it all with neuroscience, but people love the idea of the magic of the law of attraction and manifesting, because it feels like a fun way to say, hey, we do have control of our own destiny, right? Even when we don't really believe that we do, it's a fun way to test it and play with it. So when you go give something that you need, our brains, when you give a gift, for example, you feel more appreciation and love and generosity in your own body, physiologically in your body. They have studied and measured this more when you give it than when you receive it. When you give a gift, you feel more warm fuzzies than the person who does receive it. When you give anything, and like I said, it works with money too. Give money, watch it come back to you. Give a hug, watch that love, and go give appreciation. Tell someone how grateful you are and watch how grateful you feel. Like, watch that. Watch how much they appreciate you. So there is a fine line of going and doing it just to get it back. But the first time you do it, you'll be like, I don't need to get that back. Like, it just feels good to give it. Yeah. It's crazy. So that's sort of the foundation. One of the things that I strongly believe in, and how I approach my business and how I teach others to approach their healing and build their businesses so that they can heal, is serve. Show up and serve. That's huge.
I'm so happy that my audience gets to hear this. Let's do this. Let's make a plan to do this again, because we didn't get into the neuroscience.
I know, and there's so much more to talk about too. So,
all right.
Awesome.
We'll talk again
all right.
soon.
I'll talk to you
Stay
soon.
in touch.
All right. Yes, you too. All right.
I will.
Bye-bye.
Bye. That does it for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. I hope you gained from listening to Arci's experience, because my intent is to have Arci come back soon so she and I can share with you our insights on some of the neuroscience of trauma and memory, and how our brains gather and store information in traumatic situations, and how that information is consolidated into our memories in ways that can become helpful to us. I want to express my deep appreciation to Arci for her courage and strength in sharing her story, and especially for taking time from her busy schedule to be with us here on the show. I'm excited for next week's episode, as I'll be having back a previous guest, Haley Murphy. Well, she's married now, so it's Haley Roma, and she'll be talking to us about the exciting changes that have occurred in her personal and professional life. Be sure to join Haley and me next week. You'll be glad you did. Please remember to share this podcast with everyone you know. My listenership is really starting to grow, and I know it's because of you, my loyal listeners, who have been encouraging others to listen in. I can tell you're doing your part to help bring justice to victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault by encouraging them to listen to this podcast. So thank you. Please continue to do that. And as always, remember to start by believing. We'll talk to you next week.